Every morning in the Sassi of Matera, the first sounds weren't birds or bells, but the low grumble of a donkey shifting its weight against the cave wall and the soft scrape of a woman's hands shaping yesterday's leftover dough. Take young Luca in 1912. He was 9, barefoot on the cool stone floor, watching his mother divide a single loaf among 6 siblings while the goat chewed on a scrap of straw in the back. That cave was their entire world. One room carved by hand from the soft limestone, big enough for sleeping mats, a tiny hearth, and the animals that meant the difference between starvation and scraping by. No one in the family thought twice about sharing the space. It was simply how things were done in this corner of Basilicata, where the land had turned hostile long before anyone alive could remember. The trouble had roots that ran deep into the soil itself. After Italy pulled itself together as one nation in the late 1800s, the big estates, those sprawling latifundia owned by men who rarely set foot on the property, kept their iron grip on the south. Farmers like Luca's father rented tiny patches of rocky hillside on shares. They walked 5, sometimes 10 kilometers before sunrise, carrying a hoe and a small sack of beans for lunch. The earth fought back. Thin topsoil baked hard by summer droughts, washed away by winter rains that left nothing but gullies. Wheat came up stunted, olives dropped early. A good year meant enough grain to pay the rent and maybe trade for salt. A bad year, and there were plenty, meant borrowing against the next harvest at interest rates that guaranteed another season of debt. By the turn of the century, those failing fields had pushed thousands into the Sassi. What started as scattered cave shelters for tools and livestock became permanent homes for the rural poor. 2 main districts hugged the ravine, Sasso Cavioso on one side, Sasso Barisano on the other. Families crammed in wherever they could. A single grotto might hold parents, grandparents and 6 or 7 children, plus a mule for ploughing, a pig for winter meat, and chickens that pecked across the packed dirt floor. The animals weren't luxury, they were insurance. Sell a kid goat at market, and you might buy shoes for the kids. But at night the cave filled with their heat and their smell, the air thick and close. Ventilation came from the single doorway. Light was whatever trickled in or from a smoky oil lamp. When it rained, water sometimes poured straight through cracks in the ceiling, mixing with whatever had drained down from the alleys above. Water itself was a daily war. There were no pipes, no taps. Women and older children hauled buckets from public cisterns or wells farther up the slope. In dry spells the supply turned brackish, and families stretched every drop, washing, cooking, cleaning the animals with the same precious liquid. Waste ran in open channels between the stacked caves, a slow trickle that turned the narrow paths slick and foul in summer heat. Malaria bred in the stagnant pools at the bottom of the ravine. Dysentery and trachoma passed from child to child. Families buried the smallest ones in the rocky ground outside town with heartbreaking regularity. Records from the early decades of the 1900s show infant deaths climbing toward 40 or even 50% in the worst years. A mother might lose 3 babies before the 4th survived long enough to walk. The rhythm of life never slowed. Men left before first light, trudging out to the plots. Women stayed behind, tending the cave, the animals, and whatever garden scraps grew in the thin soil patches between houses. Children worked too, gathering wild greens, minding younger siblings, or helping thresh grain when the harvest came in. School was a distant dream. Most kids never learned to read. Evenings brought the only real break. Neighbors gathered in the shared courtyards carved between clusters of caves. Stories swapped about the fields, the price of wheat, the latest letter from a relative who had emigrated to America, laughter mixed with the cluck of chickens. It was a fierce kind of community, forged in the knowledge that no one else in the country seemed to care what happened down in the ravine. The 2 world wars only sharpened the edge. In 1915, fathers and older brothers disappeared into the trenches, leaving women to manage the farms alone. When they returned, if they returned, the land was poorer, the debts higher. The 1920s and 30s brought fascist promises of progress that never reached the south. While factories rose in the north, Matera stayed locked in its stone. Farmers planted what the landlords demanded and hoped the rain would come. Prices for their grain stayed low. A hailstorm or early frost could wipe out months of work. Hunger wasn't dramatic. It was quiet and constant. 1 solid meal a day was the goal. Pasta with beans or a handful of olives. Meat appeared only on feast days, and even then it was stretched thin. Then, in the mid-1940s, a book changed everything. Carlo Levi, a writer from the north who had spent time exiled in the nearby countryside, published an account that pulled back the curtain on the South's hidden misery. His descriptions of cave life, of families living alongside their animals in damp darkness, of children wasting away from preventable illness, hit like a thunderclap. Suddenly, politicians in Rome could no longer pretend the problem belonged to another century. In 1950, Prime Minister Alcide de Gasperi came to see for himself. What he found left him stunned. Thousands still trapped in conditions that shocked a modern nation. He called the Sassi a national disgrace and ordered action. The response was swift and sweeping. In 1952, a special law declared most of the cave homes uninhabitable. The state began buying up properties and building new housing blocks on the plateau above the ravine. Over the next 20 years, nearly 16,000 people were moved out. Some went willingly, exhausted by decades of struggle. Others resisted, sneaking back to their old caves until officials sealed the entrances. The relocation tore at the heart of daily life. Families who had shared courtyards and stories for generations found themselves separated into small apartments with doors that locked and streets that ran straight. The animals had to be sold or left behind. The familiar rhythm of fetching water from the well or stepping outside to see a neighbor vanished. For many, the new homes felt cold and isolating, even if they finally had running water and electricity. The Sassi sat empty after that, a ghost town of crumbling stone and silent alleys. What had once been a living, breathing district became a symbol of everything that had gone wrong in the south since unification. The farmers who once rose before dawn to wrestle with unforgiving soil had finally been pulled free, but the cost was high. Their children grew up in the new developments, learning trades their parents never imagined. The old caves waited, slowly eroding, until decades later when restoration turned them into something no one in the 1930s could have dreamed. Looking back across those 100 years, Matera's story is one of quiet endurance more than collapse. The land never gave easily, the economy stacked the deck against the people who worked it. Yet in the cramped caves, amid the dust and the animals and the endless worry over the next harvest, families kept going. They mended tools by lamplight, shared what little they had, and taught their children the stubborn patience it took to coax life from stone. The move to modern housing marked the end of an era that had outlived its time, but it didn't erase the memory of those mornings when a boy like Luca woke to the warm breath of a mule and the certain knowledge that another hard day lay ahead. That resilience, born in the Sassi, still lingers in the rock today. A reminder of how far a place can fall when the rest of the country looks away and how hard it fights to rise once someone finally looks back. Today the Sassi no longer echo with the scrape of bare feet on stone floors or the worried whispers over empty bread. Instead, they ring with new life. The very caves that once sheltered hunger and hardship have been lovingly restored, their soft limestone walls now glowing under warm lights. What was declared a national shame has become one of Italy's most extraordinary treasures. In 1993, Matera earned its place on the UNESCO World Heritage List, drawing travelers from every continent who come to wander the same twisting alleys and marvel at the ingenuity of those who once called these caves home. The descendants of those struggling farmers now walk these paths with their heads held high, running small hotels, craft workshops and restaurants inside the ancient rock. Matera's story is no longer just one of endurance, it is a powerful tale of rebirth, proving that even after decades of darkness, a place can rise again, more beautiful and full of hope than anyone who lived through the hardest years could have ever imagined.